Hello, I want to, there's a brand new speaker here, and he's from Russia. He flew all the way from Russia, and has a nice young lady over here from Russia. Because I heard her yesterday, they were excellent. And he's going to, this is Professor Kirill Novoselskiy, and he is going to speak on reflections of Mars in Russian performing arts. Thank you, and give him a hand.
Good afternoon, dear friends, dear colleagues. I would like to start with one quotation of a famous American conductor, Leopold Stokowski. And we found this quotation recently in our home archives because he addressed quite famous Russian composer, my great-grandfather, Reinhold Glier. So Stokowski wrote, "All the arts and all forms of culture as one of the highest and best means of contact between nations." So he just used all his creative life to connect nations through arts and culture. The same did my great-grandfather, and the same was the purpose of other creative people in my country. The founder, number one in Russian science fiction, was this unusual person whose nickname was Red Count of the USSR, and his real name was Alexei Tolstoy. But Tolstoy, his family name, I think it's quite familiar. Leo Tolstoy, War and Peace, famous, I think. And his father, he got really a title of Count from his father, and he was distant relative of Leo Tolstoy, really. But why red? I think in two senses. He was called by his friends Red Count because he accepted socialist or communist revolution in Russia that happened 101 years ago exactly. And not from the beginning, not immediately. So he left Russia for Europe, for Paris, spent there some time. But then he was attracted by the developments in his own country, and he came back. And immediately, he came back in 1923, and the same, well, after 2 months of his arrival, he published a book that you see the cover of this book. That's English translation, of course. He published it in his native language, in Russian, Aelita, about Mars, about developments on the Mars and connection with Earth. So from my point of view, we can also call him Red Count because his main composition, his main book was about the red planet. And later I'll show you some examples of artistic interpretation of this sujet, of this topic. And really it's, but just to give you an impression, what is it all about? Just to make it very simple, ex-sailor coming from the war, civil war finished, and he came back, and it happens in St. Petersburg. At that time it was called Leningrad already, in the name of Lenin. It was just revolution happened, and so this ex-sailor, he saw an announcement, very small announcement. inviting to fly to Mars. After come to this address, and the note said that my name is Engineer Loss. I'm inviting companions to fly with me to Mars. That's all, and the address. And this worker, well, why not? And he came to this address and talked to this engineer. And engineer, he had his own purposes, but this ex-soldier, ex-sailor, he kept in mind continuing war, continuing revolution, politics, to extend and expand Soviet Union to Mars, to form Martian Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, not USSR, but MUSSR, something like that. Okay, so these two people, they, as usual, assemble in the garage a capsule, a rocket, and after 3 days, they fill it with fuel and they start for Mars. And in Mars, they meet people, Martians, some of them like us, some of them quite different, some strange creatures, but still they can communicate in whatever language, even without words. And soon they, well, what they find on Mars? They find high-tech civilization with all like TV, internet, they don't call it internet, but it works like that. All possible means of transport that we know today, and it was more than 100 years ago written, all this. But a lot of things they see like social economic inequality, slavery, oppression, dictatorship, wars between different groups of people on the planet, and finally the preparation for uprising for a revolution. And engineer Loss is more cautious person, and the soldier, he even keeps the gun with him from Earth, brought it. And he takes the part of workers, of Martian workers, and decides to free them from exploitation, as it was common at that time. And he starts fighting. So, and well, at the end of the day, they nearly escape death because rulers of the Mars, they have good weapons, they have power, and they just finish this war, this revolution, this uprising. So this attempt, involvement in Martian affairs failed, and then they nearly escape. They start back, come back home, and something like that's very, very simple. But for me, this plot, this sujet, interesting for us for two aspects. First, there is a hidden story, and you wouldn't find this story in other interpretations that I'll show you a few minutes after now. But in the book, these hidden stories, they exist. These are the tales or stories told to engineer laws. He fell in love with local queen, Aelita, because that's why the title of this book is Aelita. And after their interaction, after their development of their relationships, one night she starts to tell unusual stories to him. And one of the stories is the origin of these people on Mars, of these cities and everything, transport, civilization, whatever. And the story is that her ancestors came from Earth. And not just from anywhere on Earth, from Atlantis. So this is part of controversial, of course, a story that once upon a time there was another civilization on Earth, and it was very high-tech developed, and it died on Earth. And here this author, this writer, he extends the story that some people, technically mostly advanced, they left Earth and they started new life on Mars. So for me, it's a funny, well, not very funny, but still interesting interpretation that when we are here these days, I think we all feel ourselves as pioneers. Pioneers that we are first going to Mars, going or not going, that's a matter of discussion these days. That's, of course, that's okay. And I think that this feeling of pioneers, that we are to be first on Mars or not to be, but still we are first to decide this. Yeah? This is fine, and this inspires us for coming here. For we came, for example, from quite another part of the globe of our just for these days. But according to this novel, Aelita, by Russian writer Alexei Tolstoy, we are not the first. That's at least the second attempt of colonizing Mars. We are on the edge of discussing the second, at least the second. So there was such an attempt thousands or millions years ago, who knows? And it, well, where are the results? The results, that's what we see now on these beautiful NASA pictures. Almost nothing. Dust, Martian dust is what left from this first attempt to colonize Mars. And the second result, well, the second, my feeling from this book is that when you try, these two men, brave men from St. Petersburg, they decided to involve in Martian affairs in this or that way. And this involvement failed. It's not failed only because of soldiers and fighting, cruel rulers, but because it's just another life there. We have our way of life, they have quite another. So I think this second aspect is also a matter of discussion. Of course, you can tell me that this is all fake, this is all imagination, writer's imagination, and but I think that on Earth, we have many mysteries in history of the Earth, including Atlantis, including many other things, ancient monuments, tombs in Egypt, etc. So I think that we can't exclude this, let's call it vision of this unusual person who was not simply a writer, he was, well, thinker, and also important that his book gave birth to a series of artistic interpretations, and it really called, let's say, at least 3 generations of Russian people, because he was number one, he was pioneer of Russian science fiction 100 years ago. So he inspired grandfathers, fathers, and ourselves, and this book is still popular. And after 1 year, he came back in 23 and published the book immediately. And in 24, already a movie of the same name, Aelita, with subtitle Queen of Mars, was produced by a Russian film studio, and the master of this film, the director, was Protazanov. And this film, it differs, of course, from the book. There is, I don't know why, but they excluded all these hidden stories, and they made this this movie, more social drama, less, not less political, less human, but more social drama, more political in terms of making a revolution, and technical advances were shown by the beautiful design of Alexandra Esther, and she was an artist, and she was a pupil and follower of Pablo Picasso. And so what I propose now, just to feel a flavor of this interpretation. By the way, you can see that this movie is still shown sometimes, not only in Russia, even more in the West. And it was a part of San Francisco Silent Film Festival, this movie, quite recently. So I propose just to see the beginning of this movie with English subtitles and with quite unusual music. Why it's not coming? Can anybody help how to put it on screen because it started to showing when we tested it, and now it's not coming. Just change.
This is the video?
Yeah.
So you're in present mode here, probably?
We propose to close it.
Does it show a preview of what you're going to be showing up there?
Is this how you control it, or is that how you control it?
But if we just start this video, no?
It's not showing your screen is the problem.
You know, it, let's see if I can,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, next San Francisco Film Festival, Silent Film Festival weekend. Attend. By the way, of course, on YouTube, it's no problem of finding this movie. Yes, and have a look at it. I hope that my next file will work. And nearly a year ago, we had a telephone call, our family museum, memorial museum. Do you have Martian music? And why should we have it? No, our great-grandfather, he didn't compose such music. But it was a telephone call from Moscow Musical Theater, named after Natalia Sats, quite famous children's theater. And they decided to stage this novel and to use music composed by our great-grandfather. So I hope that it will finally, I will close this presentation and open the final.
Спектакль посвящен столетию.
Is it working or not? Why it's not showing what's
This is primary, that's secondary, so if you grab it and drag it, is it coming in?
Is it coming? No, not coming.
Yeah, there. Okay, the problem with that now is how do we start it? Because we can't see it anymore. So,
So can we start it?
good question.
Oh, so
Can you, let me see. Can we do this next later? Oh, that's a good question. This cable is not quite long enough. I can get down. Where's the play button? Oh, shoot, don't turn the screen now, I can't see it at all.
Let go of the screen. Let the screen go.
Революции. Я ставлю романтический балет с тоталитарно-плакатным содержанием, говорит Кирилл Симонов. И всю историю с полетами на Марс воспринимаю отчасти как комикс про прекрасных, обманутых людей, революционеров и мечтателей. Двое отважных землян, инженер Мстислав Лось и бывший матрос Алексей Гусев, отправляются на Марс. Артист Максим Павлов 1 декабря исполнял роль Лося, а 2 декабря превратился в Гусева. Как в одном артисте уживаются два главных героя?
Они разные, и из-за этого как-то наоборот, мне как бы удобнее, что они настолько разные, что вот я вчера был таким более инженером, таким романтиком, а сегодня я буду разнузданным там вот моряком-революционером.
У разнузданного моряка есть преданная и любящая жена. Она до конца борется с его решением лететь на Марс, но тщетно.
Это единственный, кто согласился с Лосем лететь на Марс. Единственный. Он предлагал всем, а этот авантюрист решил с Лосем слетать, посмотреть, что такое вообще Марс этот.
Конец первого акта завершается грандиозным стартом космического корабля. Это смотрится настолько эффектно, что детская аудитория приходит в полный восторг. Жизнь на Марсе определенно есть. Да еще какая! Посланцев Земли встречают местные кактусы и гуманоиды. Воображение зрителей поражают удивительные инопланетные костюмы, созданные художником Татьяной Ногиновой. А малыши совершенно уверены, что перед ними настоящие марсиане. А Элита – дочь правителя Марса. Легкая, невесомая, трепетная. Она влюбляется в землянина. Инженер Мстислав Сергеевич Лось – ее полная противоположность. А противоположности, как известно, притягиваются.
Okay.